For 20 years, he lived beneath notice. A small apartment, unchanged, unimpressive. No upgrades, no ambition people could see, no signs of progress. They assumed life had passed him by, that he had settled, that he had failed quietly. And that assumption protected everything. While others chased comfort, he chose restraint. While others displayed success, he erased himself. No noise, no witnesses, only time working in his favor. Then one ordinary moment broke the illusion. Numbers surfaced, documents appeared, doors opened that no one knew existed. And suddenly, the man everyone ignored was no longer invisible. He had never been poor, he had been patient. Most people believe wealth announces itself, that it arrives loudly, with upgrades, with proof. They believe money changes how a person lives, how they dress, how they speak, how they are seen. But that belief is exactly why most people never recognize real wealth when it's standing right beside them. Because real wealth, especially old wealth, doesn't rush to be visible. It waits. It studies human behavior, learns how attention attracts risk, how noise invites expectation, how being noticed makes you predictable. So some people choose a different path. They choose restraint not because they lack money, but because they understand it. They live below comfort, below curiosity, below judgment, not to suffer but to remain free. This story is not about poverty, it's not about luck, and it's not about sacrifice for applause. It's about control. The control to delay gratification, to let time compound quietly, to move through the world without triggering anyone's assumptions. For 20 years, this man practiced invisibility, not because he had nothing, but because he had everything to protect. And to understand why, you have to go back to the beginning, before the silence, before the restraint, before the decision to disappear. He didn't start poor. That's the part people never guessed. Before the silence, before the restraint, before the 20 years of invisibility, there was opportunity. Not dramatic opportunity, not overnight success, but the kind that whispers instead of shouts. He was young when he first realized it, young enough to still believe effort alone was enough, old enough to notice something didn't add up. Every morning, the same faces boarded the same trains at the same time with the same tired expressions. They worked harder every year, yet moved nowhere. They earned more, yet owed more. They spoke about promotions, about raises, about making it someday, but someday never arrived. And quietly, almost uncomfortably, he noticed something else. The loudest people weren't the richest. The most relaxed people weren't the highest earners. And the ones with real freedom rarely talked about money at all. That observation didn't excite him. It unsettled him, because it meant the rules everyone followed were incomplete. He grew up surrounded by noise, not chaos but constant comparison, who upgraded first, who moved faster, who earned more, who looked successful, and like everyone else he played along, he studied, he worked, he progressed. By his late 20s, he had what society calls momentum, a respectable income, a clear career path, the approval of people who measured life in visible milestones, but momentum has a hidden cost. The faster it moves, the harder it is to change direction, and somewhere along the way he paused, not outwardly, not visibly, internally. He asked a question most people avoid because it's inconvenient. If I continue exactly like this, what does my life look like in 20 years? Not the fantasy version, the realistic one, more responsibility, more expectations. More dependence on systems that didn't care about him, only his output, and that's when he noticed it. The cage, polished, comfortable, well-paid, but still a cage. Most people respond to that realization by accelerating. They chase higher income, bigger titles, more validation. He did the opposite. He slowed down, not in performance but in lifestyle. While peers upgraded apartments, he stayed. While others celebrated raises, he quietly diverted them. While success invited consumption, he practiced restraint. not because he feared spending, but because he feared dependency. Every purchase was a future obligation. Every upgrade a silent contract, and he didn't want contracts, he wanted options. The first year was uncomfortable, not financially, psychologically. People asked questions. Why didn't he move? Why didn't he buy? Why didn't he celebrate like everyone else? He smiled, deflected, stayed vague, because explaining restraint to people addicted to display never works. They don't hear discipline, they hear judgment, so he said nothing. What most people don't understand is that the hardest part of restraint isn't denial, it's patience, because progress becomes invisible. No applause, no milestones others recognize, no external proof you're moving forward. Just quiet consistency and delayed gratification. And in that quiet, something powerful began to happen. Money stopped being emotional. It stopped feeling like reward or relief or identity. It became a tool. And tools don't need to be shown. By the 5th year, his income had doubled. His lifestyle hadn't. That gap between what he earned and what he consumed grew wider and more dangerous. Dangerous because it attracted temptation. Comfort whispered to him daily, "You've earned this. Just one upgrade. No one would blame you." And sometimes he almost listened. But then he watched others, people who once earned less than him, now trapped by lifestyles they couldn't maintain without constant income. One missed paycheck away from panic, one disruption away from collapse. They looked successful, they weren't free. So he made a rule, a quiet one: never let your life reveal your income, not out of fear but out of strategy. Because once people know what you earn, they decide what you should spend. They set expectations. They pull you into their definitions of success, and expectations are expensive. By year 10, the invisibility became intentional. He chose neutral clothes, unremarkable routines, predictable patterns, not because he lacked taste, but because attention creates memory, and memory creates interest, and interest creates questions. He didn't want questions. He wanted time to let compounding work without interference, time to build without pressure, time to remain underestimated. People mistook his simplicity for stagnation. They assumed he had peaked. That assumption became his greatest asset. No one asked for help. No one expected favors. No one monitored his progress. He was invisible, and invisibility is powerful. By year 15, his decisions looked extreme. He could afford luxury. He refused it. He could retire early. He didn't, because the goal was never escape. It was control. Control over time, over exposure, over choice. Wealth wasn't the finish line. It was insulation. And here's the truth few people are comfortable with. Real wealth grows best when no one is watching. Because attention invites opinions. Opinions invite influence, and influence compromises strategy. He wasn't hiding. He was protecting process. By year 20, the gap between perception and reality had become absurd. To the outside world, he was forgettable. To the balance sheets, he was unstoppable. And still, he didn't reveal it. Because revelation was never the point. Freedom was. What no one saw was that this life, the modest apartment, the quiet routine, the deliberate simplicity, wasn't sacrifice. It was alignment. He wasn't living beneath his means. He was living beneath expectations, and that is where power lives. But silence never lasts forever, and control, once perfected, eventually attracts a moment that demands exposure, not by choice, by circumstance. And when that moment arrived, it didn't whisper, it redefined everything. There's a strange kind of freedom that arrives the moment people decide you are not a threat. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't celebrate. It simply removes resistance. Doors stop closing. Eyes stop watching. Voices stop asking. And suddenly you can move. Most people spend their lives trying to be taken seriously. They signal intelligence. They display ambition. They prove worth. They want to be seen as capable, important, successful. And in doing so, they attract attention. attention from bosses, from peers, from competitors, from systems designed to extract value from visible success. They think visibility is power. They're wrong. Visibility is exposure. He learned this slowly. At first, being underestimated hurt. It feels personal, like being overlooked, dismissed, misjudged. People interrupt you. They explain things you already understand. They assume your limits. And early on, he noticed the impulse. The desire to correct them, to say, "You don't see the full picture," but he resisted, because every time he stayed silent, something interesting happened. People revealed themselves. They spoke freely around him. They shared assumptions. They exposed strategies. They didn't guard their words because they didn't consider him relevant. And relevance is expensive. When people think you matter, they measure you. When they think you don't, they underestimate you. And underestimation creates space. He stopped fighting perception. He began shaping it, not through lies but through omission. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't pretend. He simply never volunteered more than necessary. When asked how things were going, he said, "Fine." When asked about plans, he said, "Nothing major." When success passed quietly in the background, he let it, because correcting people's assumptions costs energy. And energy is better invested than explained. Over time, the role became effortless. He became the man people forgot to compete with. At meetings, his ideas were overlooked until someone else repeated them louder. He let them. Credit is currency for people who need validation. He needed freedom. What he discovered was something deeply uncomfortable for most people to accept. The world does not reward the smartest person in the room. It rewards the most visible, and visibility comes with obligations, expectations, scrutiny, politics. He wanted none of it. By remaining underestimated, he avoided battles he didn't need to fight. He avoided egos that demanded recognition. He avoided alliances that required loyalty. And quietly, he built leverage. Leverage doesn't look impressive while it's forming. It looks boring, accounts growing slowly. Positions compounding quietly, opportunities developing without announcements. While others debated, he accumulated. While others argued, he observed. While others chased recognition, he gained optionality. There is a reason the most dangerous people in history were rarely the loudest. They listened more than they spoke. They moved later, but decisively. And when action came, it felt sudden, but it wasn't. It was prepared. By allowing people to underestimate him, he gained something priceless, unfiltered access. People spoke honestly in his presence. They revealed fears. They revealed greed. They revealed desperation. And desperation creates opportunity. He saw colleagues leveraging themselves for lifestyles. He saw leaders confusing authority with immunity. He saw systems designed to reward short-term performance while quietly punishing long-term stability. And because no one thought he was important, no one thought to hide these things from him. Underestimation turned him into a ghost, present but unaccounted for. There is a quiet discipline required to remain underestimated. You must resist the urge to perform, to show progress, to demonstrate intelligence, to win arguments, because winning arguments often means losing positioning. He watched others sabotage themselves without realizing it. They corrected small slights publicly. They demanded recognition prematurely. They tried to be seen as powerful before they actually were, and power resented exposure. So he practiced restraint. He spoke last, if at all. He asked questions instead of offering conclusions. He let others feel smart, competent, in control, because people protect environments where they feel superior, and he wanted protection. Years passed, and something subtle shifted. People stopped projecting ambition onto him. They stopped seeing him as competition. They stopped monitoring his growth. That invisibility became armor. While others were evaluated quarterly, he was ignored annually. While others were promoted into visibility, he was left alone to structure quietly, left alone to invest patiently, left alone to prepare. and preparation thrives in solitude. By now, he understood a rule few ever articulate. The moment people believe you are powerful, they try to control you. They offer partnerships with conditions. They offer opportunities with strings. They offer praise with expectations. And expectations are leverage. So he stayed underestimated, not as a disguise, but as a boundary. When people assumed he lacked ambition, they left him space. When they assumed he lacked resources, they left him time. When they assumed he lacked influence, they revealed plans. And slowly, almost invisibly, the balance shifted. He no longer needed approval. He didn't need to be chosen. He could choose. What people never saw was how deliberate it all was. Every modest decision, every neutral response, every refusal to signal success. They weren't accidents. They were filters, filtering out attention, filtering out obligation, filtering out interference. Underestimation became his advantage because it removed pressure, pressure to perform, pressure to prove, pressure to conform. Without pressure, he could think clearly. Without noise, he could see patterns. And once you see patterns, you can position yourself ahead of them. But there is a cost. Being underestimated means being misunderstood. It means people assume limits that don't exist. It means watching others receive recognition for work you quietly enabled, and that requires something rare: ego control. Most people collapse under that weight. They want acknowledgement. They want validation. They want their effort to be seen. He wanted his outcome to be untouchable, so he paid the price: silence, patience, delayed recognition, and in exchange he bought freedom. By the time the world began shifting, when markets trembled, when systems tightened, when noise turned to panic, he was already positioned, already insulated, already invisible. And when pressure finally arrived, it missed him, because pressure follows visibility, and he had none. What people fail to understand is that underestimation is not weakness. It is strategic humility. It is choosing long-term advantage over short-term praise. It is letting others believe they are ahead while you quietly change the game. And one day, inevitably, underestimation reaches its limit. Not because you reveal yourself, but because reality does. Numbers surface, structures become visible, control becomes undeniable. And when that happens, the same people who ignored you begin rewriting history. They say, "I always knew." They didn't, they never looked. But by then, it doesn't matter, because the power of being underestimated is not the surprise, it's the preparation, and he was prepared. There is a subtle, almost imperceptible form of power that exists when people believe what you are not. They imagine limits, they assign roles, they draw conclusions, and you let them be wrong, because correction is a transaction. Every correction costs something: attention, energy, perception. And if the goal is not to impress, but to dominate quietly, then correction becomes a liability. He discovered this truth early. People assumed he was average. They assumed he struggled. They assumed his ambition was modest. And every assumption was a gift, one he never returned. The first time he felt the temptation to correct was subtle. A colleague remarked casually, "You'll never understand this deal, too complex." The words were dismissive, almost insulting. His instinct was to respond, to explain, to prove, but he didn't. Because proving competence in the moment gives away advantage. Instead, he nodded, acknowledged, and moved on. People rarely notice what they do not expect, and he understood that human perception is predictable. When people underestimate you, they lower their guard. They reveal plans. They reveal weaknesses. They reveal opportunity. Correct them too soon, and the moment vanishes. Every interaction became a game, not a game of ego. Not a game of validation, a game of timing. He learned to measure every word, every nod, every silence. The rule was simple: speak only when it maximizes advantage. And advantage rarely comes from being right in the eyes of the uninformed. There were moments that could have exposed him, moments when an idea he planted would have gone unnoticed, or when his understanding surpassed everyone else in the room. The temptation to correct rose, but he remembered. The world rarely rewards knowledge, it rewards perception, and perception must remain malleable until the right moment. He let others speak, he let them lead, he let them assume superiority. And while they basked in the glow of imagined competence, he absorbed information, he observed patterns, he anticipated errors, he stored leverage. There is a kind of patience that feels unnatural at first, a resistance to pride, a resistance to the urge to be right, a resistance to claim credit prematurely. But patience is the currency of influence. The longer you wait, the more others commit to assumptions, and the cost of being underestimated increases. He watched people sabotage themselves without interference. They made promises they couldn't keep. They overcommitted. They flaunted knowledge before it was validated, and each misstep added to his silent advantage. Because advantage does not scream, it accumulates. He never needed to correct the world. The world corrected itself. Every overconfident prediction, every exposed flaw, every assumption added to his invisible lead. By the time reality arrived, he had positioned himself beyond the reach of surprise. Sometimes he imagined what would happen if he revealed everything early. The disbelief, the shock, the admiration, but the thought faded quickly. Because admiration is a liability. People admire then expect. People admire then control, and he had no intention of being controlled. He perfected subtlety, a raised eyebrow at the right moment, a carefully chosen question, a silence that invited misjudgment. The world filled in the gaps. Their assumptions painted the picture. Their underestimation became his armor. There is power in letting others believe they are right. It frees you from scrutiny. It grants access. It gives time because underestimation creates space, and space is priceless. He never corrected assumptions about wealth, about skill, about intelligence. Why? Because every correction draws attention. Attention reveals intention. Intention invites interference. Interference slows compounding, and he valued time over recognition. The world is impatient. It wants answers. It wants certainty. It punishes ambiguity, but he learned to embrace it. Let them fill the gaps. Let them miscalculate. Let them believe they understand, because misunderstanding is the ultimate leverage. By the 20th year, his silence had become a strategy refined to perfection. It was not humility. It was not ignorance. It was precision. Every uncorrected assumption, every understated success, every overlooked contribution was a deliberate placement. And when reality finally revealed itself, it did so with force. Because he had mastered one simple rule: never correct the world before the world is ready. Correction is useless in the moment. Correction is power when timed, and timing is everything. He understood that most people live their lives reactively, trying to prove themselves at every turn. He lived proactively, building advantage silently, and the irony was exquisite. The people who judged him lowest were the same people who underestimated him most profoundly and would be the last to see his true influence. By never correcting them, he was free, free to observe, free to build, free to move, free to win without resistance and without interference. And that freedom was invisible, because the moment people realize it, it stops being free. He never corrected them because he understood the most fundamental truth of power. It is not what people know about you that matters. It is what you know about them and how you use it while they remain blind. And in that blindness, he became untouchable. For 20 years, he moved unseen, silent, invisible, yet always present. No one measured him correctly. No one guessed his true reach. No one suspected the depth of his patience, and that was exactly how he wanted it. But every era of invisibility has an expiration date. Time is patient, people are impatient, and reality has a way of insisting on recognition. It began subtly, a meeting, a conversation, a file misplaced. A name mentioned where it shouldn't have been. Nothing extraordinary, just a ripple, and ripples become waves. At first people laughed. He's exaggerating, they said. Impossible. No one can hold that much influence quietly. They had no context. They had no understanding. They assumed what they always assumed. He was ordinary. But then numbers began appearing. Accounts, investments, properties, movements in markets, every ledger a silent monument to patience. Every transfer a reminder of restraint, every asset a piece of the puzzle that no one had noticed. The moment wasn't public, it didn't scream, it didn't need to. It arrived in subtle shockwaves. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes widened in disbelief. Calculators stopped ticking. People who had dismissed him found themselves recalculating, reassessing, relearning the rules. He never entered a room to announce it. He didn't need to. Reality spoke for him. A quiet email, a document in plain sight, a bank transfer misread, and suddenly the truth revealed itself. And the world collapsed in its assumptions. Those who underestimated him felt the sting, not out of anger, not out of envy, but because they realized how thoroughly they had misjudged him. For years they had watched him, observed his routines, measured his comfort, and all that time he had been building leverage with patience, with discipline, with invisibility as armor. Some tried to rationalize it. Maybe he inherited it. Maybe he won the lottery. Maybe there's something we don't know. And there was something they could never replicate: time, consistency, control. The first meeting after the truth surfaced was awkward. Colleagues shuffled papers. Leaders adjusted their postures. Whispers filled the room. No one spoke first. No one made eye contact. The silence was the acknowledgement. They finally understood. The man they ignored, the man they dismissed, was untouchable. He didn't gloat. He didn't explain. He simply continued, because the moment of revelation wasn't for him. It was for them. A lesson, a shock. A quiet demonstration of what patience and invisibility can achieve. Some people felt small, some felt betrayed, some felt envy, and he felt nothing, because he had never lived for recognition. He had never moved for applause. He had never existed for validation. The silence had finally broken, and yet he was unchanged. Same modest apartment, same quiet routines, same controlled pace, same invisible dominance. Everything was as it had been, except now perception aligned with reality. People asked questions. How? When? Why didn't we know? And he smiled quietly, not because he wanted to teach, not because he wanted to impress, but because he knew the truth was self-evident. Everything they saw now was the fruit of 20 years of deliberate inaction. The irony was exquisite. The very assumptions they had used to dismiss him had sheltered him. The world's ignorance had been his protection, its disbelief his leverage. He never corrected them. He never announced himself. He never justified the past, because power reveals itself naturally, and the world cannot unsee reality. From that moment onward, his influence was undeniable, not because he chased recognition, but because recognition became irrelevant. Numbers, structures, control, they spoke louder than words, and in the quiet aftermath, he remained free. Free from expectation, free from attention, free from the chains of perception. The lesson was clear. The world rewards those who are seen. It punishes those who are predictable. It misunderstands those who wait, and he had waited with purpose. Every underestimated glance, every ignored comment, every moment of silence had prepared him for this single truth. Patience, discipline, and invisibility are the ultimate forms of power. The moment the silence broke, it did not change him. It changed everyone else. The moment the silence broke, the world shifted, not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, relentlessly. People recalculated. They revised assumptions. They rewrote mental models. Colleagues who had once dismissed him began to notice small details they had overlooked. Files, transfers, connections, habits. The pieces they ignored for 20 years now glared at them in clarity, and they felt exposed. Because reality cannot be ignored, no matter how long you have believed otherwise. Some tried to rationalize. Maybe he inherited it. Maybe it's a fluke. Maybe he had help we don't understand. And in every rationalization, there was the faint sting of guilt. They had underestimated him. They had misjudged him. They had allowed invisibility to lull them into complacency. Leaders who had once overlooked him suddenly noticed every decision he had made, every suggestion. Every silent contribution, every underestimated action was now a blueprint of influence. They scrambled, trying to reorient, trying to recalibrate power. Some tried to emulate him. They copied routines. They adopted restraint. They attempted patience, but influence is not imitation. It is alignment. It is foresight. It is execution before recognition. And they were late. The ripple of revelation spread beyond the office. Business partners, investors, associates. People who once assumed he lacked skill now reassessed risk, now reconsidered alliances. The quiet man who had been underestimated for 2 decades suddenly became central to every calculation. And yet, he did nothing overtly. He did not boast, he did not announce, he did not celebrate. The world projected urgency onto him, and he remained calm, controlled, unseen within the storm. Some approached him directly. They asked for explanations, for insight, for guidance, and he answered selectively, never more than necessary, never more than the situation demanded, because information is leverage, and leverage loses power when freely given. Whispers began to circulate. Did you know? Have you seen the accounts? Everything we thought was wrong. And with every whisper, attention increased. Expectations rose, pressure mounted, but he was already prepared. The irony was exquisite. Those who judged him lowest, the very people who had ignored him, were now repositioning themselves to benefit from the influence they once denied. And he observed, not with malice, not with impatience, but with strategy. Because influence is not about reaction, it is about timing. He had been underestimated, and now they had overcompensated. They offered partnerships. They sought alliances. They whispered promises they would have never whispered before. And he listened, measured, decided. Every approach, every offer, every subtle overture was assessed for alignment, not for appearance. People assumed revelation would bring ego. They expected celebration. They anticipated pride. They imagined announcement. But he remained invisible in demeanor, visible only in consequence, because the strongest influence is never about proving you exist. It is about shaping outcomes without forcing perception. Meanwhile, the ripple reached those beyond immediate circles. Markets shifted subtly. Connections realigned quietly. Opportunities moved toward him without announcement, without spectacle, because the world had recalibrated based on his unseen structures. Some people attempted to confront him. How did you do it? Why didn't you tell anyone? Were we ever in the same room with you at all? He answered with silence or a subtle smile, because explanation diminishes influence. Because curiosity is more powerful than revelation, and he allowed curiosity to thrive. This aftermath was not chaos, it was recognition, measured, calculated. He did not need to intervene. He did not need to dominate. He had already built the structures. He had already built the leverage, and now they discovered it for themselves. The world reacts violently to surprises, especially when assumptions are shattered. People argued. They reassessed. They doubted their own judgment. They recalculated alliances. They repositioned themselves in ways that revealed desperation. And desperation reveals opportunity. He remained unchanged, same apartment, same routines, same invisible discipline. Nothing altered his pace, nothing accelerated his timing, because the aftermath was expected. He had not sought attention, he had not courted recognition, he had only executed patience. And now the world was aligned with reality, not because he forced it, but because truth eventually demands acknowledgement. Some people scrambled to imitate, some attempted to leverage his methods, some attempted to claim proximity. And each attempt only highlighted their misunderstanding, because mastery cannot be replicated by observation. It is built in silence, through discipline, through delayed action, through invisibility. By the end of the first year after revelation, everything had changed, not for him, for them. Their perception, their assumptions, their calculations had all shifted, and in that shift, he retained complete freedom. Because freedom is never granted, it is preserved. It is defended quietly through foresight, through patience, through invisibility, and the lesson was unmistakable. The world rewards the visible, but it honors the invisible. The world notices the loud, but it underestimates the silent. The world assumes, and the silent leverage the assumptions to their advantage, and he had done exactly that. The years passed, the revelation had come and gone. Ripples spread across markets, offices, and lives. Some tried to imitate, some tried to understand, most still didn't, and he remained unchanged. The world expected transformation. Drama, celebration, statements, but he had no need for spectacle, no need for applause, no need for recognition, because power is silent, influence is invisible, and legacy is earned quietly. People remembered the moment of revelation, the shock, the disbelief, the recalculations, but they rarely remembered the years that preceded it, the decades of patience, the decades of invisibility, the decades of restraint. And that was intentional, because the true lesson doesn't come from the reveal, it comes from the preparation. He continued to move quietly. Decisions were made without announcement. Assets grew without commentary. Opportunities were captured before anyone else realized they existed. He had created a system that didn't require constant validation, a life that didn't demand recognition, a strategy that outlasted observation. Those who had underestimated him still underestimated him. Even after seeing the truth, even after witnessing the scale, their perception lagged behind reality, and that lag was the final advantage. He began mentoring quietly. Not in public forums, not in flashy seminars, not to impress, but privately, strategically. Only those who demonstrated patience, discipline, and understanding were allowed insight. And through this, he began shaping the next generation, the quiet ones, the underestimated, the observers, those who understood that freedom, patience, and invisibility are the greatest forms of wealth. He never corrected assumptions. He never revealed strategies prematurely. He never flaunted accomplishments, because every word spoken has the power to reduce leverage, and leverage is the currency of influence. He had learned what most never understand. The world rewards the visible, but it honors the invisible. Those who scream for attention may achieve short-term recognition. Those who move quietly, strategically, inherit long-term freedom. And the legacy of his silence was profound. It was not measured in accounts. It was not measured in possessions. It was not measured in admiration. It was measured in choice, autonomy, control, time itself. He understood that silence is not emptiness. It is power concentrated. It is preparation. It is the invisible force that reshapes outcomes without anyone knowing. And in that silence, he had built a life untouchable by expectation. The world would continue to underestimate, to misjudge, to assume. And each time, it would create new opportunities, because the underestimated are underestimated not by accident, but by design. He looked back on the 20 years and understood the ultimate truth. You do not need to be seen to be powerful. You do not need to announce to be influential. You do not need recognition to leave a mark. All you need is patience, discipline, and the courage to remain unseen while building everything. The world would remember the revelation. They would discuss it. They would marvel. They would speculate, but he would remember the silence, the quiet hours, the invisible choices, the unseen work, and that was his true inheritance. Because in the end, a legacy is not what others notice. Legacy is what endures long after assumptions crumble, and the legacy of silence is eternal. The story ends here, but the lesson lingers. Silence is not emptiness, patience is not inaction, and being underestimated is not weakness. Power is quiet, influence is subtle, freedom is built in the unseen moments. So ask yourself, are you building for attention or are you building for autonomy? The world may underestimate you, it may misjudge you, it may ignore you completely, and that is your advantage. Because real wealth does not demand recognition, it waits, it grows, it transforms. If you want more insights on wealth, power, and the quiet strategies the world rarely notices, follow Capital Lux, like, subscribe, and step into the world of influence without noise. The story of patience is only beginning.